The only corruption that the government appears to tackle is bribery, which is not the only kind of corruption. 8 November 2014 at 11:58. Mr. M. Clark, Director, RUSI, BCCS. Dear Mr. Clark, information reached https://www.rusi.org newsref N54536738 BHC2D VFELIU2BGCW. Congratulations, once again, on the above. May I please draw your attention to the following list, which I believe goes a long way to illustrating the crux of the serious crime problem in the UK, and I hope it will prove useful to you. White-collar crime is officially very low on the list of government concerns, and has never been properly addressed, according to Mr. Clark. For too long, the UK has not taken the investigation and prosecution of white-collar crime seriously, with the obvious consequence that white-collar criminals don't take the risk of enforcement seriously, he said. Put another way, the deterrent effect is missing. Note, and will remain so, unless there is imprisonment of these criminals rather than deferred prosecution agreements. The one difficulty with enforcing really serious frauds of international significance is that they are hugely expensive and costly to investigate and prosecute, Clark told the Financial Times. Note, so Britain doesn't bother. Full story here: http://www.outlaw.com and articles 2014 June Government to review UK's ability to tackle white-collar crime. According to reports, the Treasury Department refuses to allocate sufficient funds to the Serious Fraud Office in order that they may do their job properly. They are in a perpetual state of bankruptcy, and are forced to go cap in hand for more funds on a regular and ongoing basis. http://www.bloomberg.com News 2014-10-23 UK's FO seeks extra funding for Barclays Libor probes HTML. The Home Secretary made a decision to cut back on police resources. Consequently, police across the country are short-staffed and cannot cope with the rampant crime in the UK, much less transnational crime or complex white-collar crime. They often do not have the time to do their jobs, because they are being used as private militia for local governments, bailiffs, and private corporations in civil matters. Recently, West Mercia Police deployed a police helicopter and some 50 or so personnel to assist in an unlawful eviction connected to a fraud case. Similar misuse of resources took place in Northumbria a few weeks prior, and have taken place in other parts of the country. Police are rushed off their feet intimidating victims of crime, involving themselves in civil matters, and assisting criminals in fraudulent bankruptcies and land title transfers. Resources are therefore stretched. Despite declarations by the Home Office to the contrary, British police are politically controlled and motivated, as is the British media. The Home Secretary established a national crime agency, which is part of the Home Office and directly under her control. It is intended to replace the Serious Fraud Office and the Serious Organised Crime Agency. It cannot be independent of government, as long as Ms. May has this agency sitting in the Home Office under her control, and any commitment to transnational serious organized crime fighting will be like walking through mud. http://www.telegraph.co.uk News Politics Liberal Democrats 11,207,460 Norman Baker working with Theresa May was like walking through mud HTML. It is to be hoped that, one day, whistleblowers from the Serious Fraud Office will come forward and expose the ties that have been binding them. The new National Crime Agency, so far, does not appear to take any action on matters continually put before them by members of the public. Nor, as usual, do any of the Home Office ministers or Justice ministers, including those whose remit is serious organised crime, such as Karen Bradley, MP. The only corruption that the government appears to tackle is bribery, which is not the only kind of corruption. Investigations under the Bribery Act are focused on the private sector, with absolutely no regard for the rampant corruption in the public sector. The purpose of the Bribery Act is to provide a lucrative business for lawyers on both sides of the Atlantic, and the recent introduction of American-style justice in the form of deferred prosecution agreements, rather than imprisonment for economic criminals, is further evidence that government profit is the motivator for the Bribery Act, rather than justice. Other criminals get prison sentences. The deferred prosecution agreements will be selective. Obviously, the plan is to let banksters and other crooks pay fines, which they have budgeted for anyway, and this is not a deterrent to economic crime. However, these fines will supplement the Treasury budget nicely. The public does not view this as justice. It is a sort of cat-and-mouse racket theatrical act, where the criminals and government always win, and the victim always loses. The Leveson inquiry into phone hacking has been used as an excuse to cripple journalists and freedom of speech in the UK, and not enough attention was paid to the fact that the corrupt people are the ones who have leaked police information to the press and who take bribes, rather than the tempters, that is, police were more guilty, because they are public servants, and have a duty of care. There are virtually no police trained and experienced to any significant degree in forensic accounting employed by individual forces across the country, except for some 28 persons employed by, or contracted to, the Serious Fraud Office. Greater Manchester Police, the second largest force in the country, has only one such trained and experienced economic forensic analyst, or at least it did at last check, some 3 years ago. Police across the country are falsifying national statistics figures, due to intelligent methods of tracking performance, which demand has been placed upon them by some airhead in government, and which cause police to concentrating only on easy and quick to solve and prosecute ASBOs, B&S, etc., rather than the network of complex organized crime being operated by criminals with law and accounting degrees in plain sight, using the legal system. The emphasis on performance is quantity and not quality, which is hard to record as a statistic but a more clear indicator of quality policing. Police do not seem to understand that falsification of records is fraud, and a criminal offense. They are not punished for it. Money is spent on water cannons, which will no doubt be used to control both street gangs and lawful demonstrators alike, rather than on, for example, forensic accountants. The Association of Chief Police Officers, ACPO, is a private, limited company, not subject to the Freedom of Information Act, and which had a memorandum of understanding with the Law Society, another private, limited company, not to investigate police or lawyers without consent from the other party. This is blatant perversion of justice. Chief constables are serving two masters, ACPO and their own force, not to mention their own interests. ACPO is subsidized by public funding, and has profit arrangements with the private sector, which profits are not put back into the public purse. The government is therefore subsidizing a private business, which in turn dictates to government. ACPO is a very questionable force for justice and the rule of law. A copy of the Memorandum of Understanding can be provided upon request to me by any interested party. It should never have existed. In short, white-collar crime in the UK is rarely investigated, and the police publicly and loudly declare fraud to be a civil matter, despite criminal laws that are supposed to be in effect, such as the Fraud Act 2006. If not strongly challenged by the victims, the police turn victims away and will not deal with them or record their allegations. In the event that police are pushed to record the crime, it is not properly investigated. The problems and extent of the crimes are therefore hidden, and a true picture of crime in the UK has not yet emerged. Because they are short-staffed, and because police do not have sufficient members, who are highly trained in forensic accounting and legal work, police refuse to record and investigate white-collar crime, unless committed against the state or powerful individuals and corporations. In at least one case, the Metropolitan Police hired themselves out for profit as a private investigation agency, to investigate fraud committed against Virgin, yet continue to ignore thousands of taxpayer victims of fraud, some of whom have sustained losses in the multi-millions of pounds in each individual case. As a result, homes, farms, and businesses are being stolen by fraud at will, and this is being done using the civil courts and corrupt individuals working under cover of the courts and the legal system. This is a two-tiered legal system that only the very rich can access, and not those bankrupted by fraud and corruption and without the funds to use the civil courts, particularly now that legal aid is denied them too. Because of police unwillingness to record and investigate crime, victims, if they are unwise enough and have some funds, are forced to try and expose the crimes in civil courts, where the legal mafia and courts can take their money and, working with a select few corrupt judiciary, ensure that they have no chance of winning their cases. Judicial corruption can take place because of lack of oversight and the usual willful blindness of the Ministry of Justice and Home Office. Clear-titled real estate properties owned by elderly people are most often targeted, and much of the crime takes place under cover of powers of attorney and the Court of Protection, where court-appointed deputies also have a license to steal. As there are no ceiling caps on fee structures, the court is secret, and no family or advocate is allowed to scrutinize the books. All is conducted in secret in this court, with lawyers charging top legal fees to those who have lost capacity, and are unable to question anything or make choices. It is an ideal feeding ground for unscrupulous individuals, and the Ministry of Justice Minister, Simon Hughes, has stated that it has no plans to rectify the matter. Injunctions have been used to silence victims of crime taking place in this particular court and others. Some £3.2 billion of private assets have been corralled from those who have lost mental capacity by the Court of Protection. These assets belong to Britain's most vulnerable people, and are held in the Bank of England, paying them only 0.5% interest. There is no choice of banks allowed, and it is alleged that these monies are deposited in the Treasury account, offsetting the national debt, which, if true, is false accounting. Errors in accounting have been made and, considering the connection to the Bank of England, which has been found guilty of lax security protocols to prevent money laundering, should be seriously scrutinized by the international community. There is no proper oversight of the courts or court process, and normalization of deviance by both frontline employees, managers, and other public officials has enabled the rule of law to disintegrate. In other words, nobody is abiding by the rules or doing their jobs properly, and can continue to do anything they like because there is no proper oversight, and no action is ever taken to rectify the situation, because the entire focus of the British establishment is covering up before anything else. The Land Registry refuses to investigate fraudulent land title transfers, and has been accused of serious corruption. The Minister for the Land Registry declared that he has no powers to intervene. There is evidence to suggest land registry collusion, to defraud with private individuals, and police have not taken action. Here, the government detaches itself from the abuse of Britain's rule of law by the legal profession, and appears to sanction it. Email me when Lord Fox speaks. Most recent appearances. Numerology. Full profile. Lord Fox Conservative. Her Majesty's government has not made any representations to the Law Society about its practice note on Sharia compliant. The legal profession is independent of government, and is regulated by approved regulators, for which the Legal Services Board (LSB) has oversight responsibility. The approved regulators and LSB are also independent of government, as are the bodies which deal with complaints about those in the legal profession. http:// www.theyworkforyu.com Ranzid 2014-10-27A 138.0 and S. Magnus G 138.1. Some questions should be asked about the implications of Sharia law and international law, now that Sharia is gaining a foothold in the UK, and the government prefers to leave the matter in the hands of private limited companies, such as the Law Society, rather than take responsibility and be accountable to the international community and its own citizens. In the Court of Protection, money laundering has taken place, along with other white-collar crimes and theft. This is as a result of this court having virtually no security protocols to prevent fraud and other crimes, and the Ministry of Justice's continued refusal to rectify matters, despite being informed of weak areas over and over again. What would be the reason for this, do you suppose? It leaves the back door open to fraudsters and money launderers. Fraud enablement is a criminal offence in the UK. The Court of Protection fits the definition of fraud enabler. The implications of this, in terms of global security, are quite frightening and should be examined by those concerned about money laundering and terrorism, in particular. Court of Protection certificates of mental incapacity are not manufactured with any serial numbers or other fraud prevention specifications, and are therefore wide open to allowing fraud, which takes place at criminals' will, but is rarely investigated. There has been fraud on the court involving criminals with law degrees, as a result of deviation from the court process and legal regulations, due to either corruption or laziness, and involving the Office of the Official Solicitor and Court of Protection. There is virtually no oversight of paperwork process, and no oversight on individual files by the National Audit Office or anyone else. Britain's most vulnerable citizens are being targeted for their assets, and lawyers fall over themselves in a scramble to get Court of Protection work, because it is as easy as taking candy from a baby, extremely lucrative, secret, and unchallenged. The very people that the system is supposed to protect are being targeted by corrupt individuals and criminals with law degrees, and the Ministry of Justice turns its head the other way, despite repeated attempts to draw their attention to the very serious lack of security protocols. In general terms, the state and all officials, with template responses to victims of crime and corruption, declare that we cannot intervene in individual cases. These individual cases are subsequently binned, and nobody is looking at the huge number of individual cases and their common denominators. No procedures have been established for the government to properly analyze trends, particularly in light of police refusing to record crime and happy ministerial correspondence clerks sending out template responses, or ignoring the correspondence entirely. Oversight bodies are alleged to be corrupt or, at the very least, biased with conflicts of interest. In the case of police forces, they are paid from the budget of their local government, and police do not therefore assist the public or the victims, if they do not feel like it, or if doing so will expose corruption in the midst of their paymasters. They are unable to make the mental connection that it is the taxpayer who is the employer, and not some corrupt individuals in municipal or central government. Police refuse to bite the hand that feeds them, and have declared that they will never investigate government. Police are being used as private militia in some cases, and many allegations have been made against North Yorkshire and West Yorkshire, to name but two municipal bodies and police forces. Multiple allegations have been made against several other forces, one of which is South Wales Police, as detailed at the end of this email. Human rights charities and the Parliamentary Human Rights Committee do not respond to victims in the UK, as all attention is focused on war zones outside of the country and protecting foreign investments, and yet they are receiving public monies, and should be protecting the British people from domestic corruption, human and civil rights abuses, and crime by speaking out. Similarly, the press is not reporting on matters, as notices and injunctions are used to prevent them, and some of them are following a government agenda anyway, such as the BBC injunctions, generally, have been placed on individuals to prevent them from exposing crime, particularly crimes taking place at high levels and through the courts. A review of Hansard reports indicates that parliamentarians are focused only on corruption abroad, and not domestic corruption. Discussions about domestic corruption are conspicuous by their absence from both houses. There is virtually no mention of domestic corruption, yet it exists in bucketfuls, and is facilitated in many ways, none the least of which is the punishment of whistleblowers, both inside the workplace and outside, and the total disregard for proper procedure, even in everyday business conducted by public servants, whose objective appears to be obstruction and denial of service at all costs. In the workplace, people are threatened with job loss and worse. There is no protection for them, nor is there any protection for members of the public that expose crime and corruption. Nasty things sometimes happen to them. Under the knife. Medical malpractice and cover-ups in the NHS. Victim persecution, and attempted abuse of psychiatry to conceal wrongdoing. http youtube.cvjtexu. Outside of the workplace, people have been punished by police harassment, and the Department of Public Works and Pensions cutting off benefits, to name but a few, false entries in police computers and other databases, which have then been shared across agencies or the other way around. Victims are unable to get the false entries investigated or removed, and this affects them for their whole life. The NHS has been implicated as one of the biggest culprits, classifying victims of clinical negligence, for example, as mentally ill. There have been very serious allegations made, including assassinations and/or strange accidents. Consider Dr. David Kelly, for example, and Stan Richardson. Striking unionist construction workers have been placed on blacklists, denying them employment for life. There appears to be a legal blacklist, as I have seen evidence, of what looks like virtually every lawyer in the land denying whistleblowers victims of serious institutionalized crime representation in the courts. Whistleblowers and victims have been persecuted transnationally, with blagging by social services, the issuance of European arrest warrants and the cooperation of the judiciary, or even without the knowledge or involvement of the judiciary. This indicates the transnational extent of the organized crime, and is definitely of concern to other nations. Transparency International UK does not accurately depict the corruption picture in the UK. Several members of the House of Lords sit on their advisory committee, and this is a conflict of interest. Kroll is one of Transparency International's sponsors, and eyebrows are being raised in connection with City of London police corruption and Kroll. This is also a conflict of interest and, as Transparency International UK never reflects the true picture in the UK, it would appear to be a negative association. Please see http tinyurlcomkev62zp and http www.citywoflondoNPOLICECO for just how deeply Kroll is embedded in British injustice. Obviously, the lines between police, private business, oversight bodies, and criminal organisations in the UK are extremely blurred, and this is the responsibility of the British government, which has so far remained unaccountable to Parliament, and to the British public. Lord Magnus of Drumglass UUP. Hansard source citation, H.L. Deb, 15 May 2012, c. 332. One may be advised to speak to the Independent Police Complaints Commission. I have only to be told that the fairly obvious injustice that concerns me was not within its bailiwick, because my complaint overlapped with social services. I belatedly referred the issue to the Justice Department, but it could not intervene. I am referring to a case where a lady in her 80s was cheated out of her home. The minister knows it well, and over the past 3 years the Home Office has received hundreds of communications through me about the matter. Successive secretaries of state have been so concerned that none would meet me, despite the fact that Interpol was activated to pursue this elderly lady all the way to her son's home in Austria. Does anyone in authority care that social services and police in North Yorkshire have conspired in the persecution of Mrs. Hofsroer and her son? Are details of dismissals, forced retirements and other shady and costly measures pertaining to North Yorkshire Police available to legislators in Parliament? No basic justice is distorted by the system, but I can see nothing to address this major issue in the government's plans. http www.theyworkforyu.com LordZid 2012-05-15A 258.7 and S Hofsroer G 332.0. The template replies to desperate victims of white-collar crime are most often sent out by clerical staff, and the ministers or officials may never have seen the evidence or complaint. Nobody knows for sure. Most often, no replies are received at all. There's simply no response. Either that, or we also have evidence that emails are being deleted without being read. The public is treated with disdain. As a result of template replies sent out if ever by tardy government correspondence personnel and officials, and failure to investigate individual cases at all levels of government, both local and central, nobody has been assigned to examine, collate, and analyze the types of criminal complaints that people are being prevented by the state from lodging. This forms a nice little insular shield for organized crime to prosper in the bosom of the government, courts, and public bodies, as criminals know that neither police nor government will investigate. As a result, Britain is now known as the organized crime capital of Europe. Government does not compel police to uphold the rule of law and is complicit in depriving the police of funds for that purpose. Lawmakers do not appear to press government hard enough to ensure that their laws are being upheld. Only a few speak out, but their cries fall on the deaf ears of the Home Office, Ministry of Justice, and Prime Minister. Civil procedure rules are not being adhered to, or have been changed by stealth without Parliament's knowledge, as the rules are not being followed by court personnel and judiciary, and obviously not the legal mafia, which is operating white-collar crime syndicates within the legal system, stealing land, homes, farms, and businesses by colluding not to adhere to civil procedure rules or the rule of law. We can supply much evidence of this, and witnesses. Court tapes, files, documents frequently go missing. CCTV cameras mysteriously fail to operate the crucial times, which are important to victims as evidence. At all other times, they operate perfectly well when required by police as evidence against others. I have knowledge of at least one of the Big Four accounting firms being accused of orchestrating a major fraudulent bankruptcy, and there are more, evidenced by the Lawrence Tomlinson report, which was presented to Vince Cable, Minister for Business, and no action has been taken. The public is still waiting to see what kind of cover-up will take place. It is believed that the Serious Fraud Office might be using forensic accountants from these companies as contractors, but it is not known for certain. If so, this practice is a security risk, as with any private agency being contracted for policing and national security purposes. Anyone who persists in fighting his case in court can be, and frequently is, labeled a vexatious litigant and denied justice permanently. If that fails, mental health legislation is often used to silence the victim. See the Maurice Kirk allegations re Dr. Tuggin Williams and South Wales Police below. There appears always to be organized establishment cover-ups across several departments, rather than any serious approach to eliminating crime and corruption. The public may be forgiven for drawing the conclusion that the government itself is a party to the crime and corruption and is, in fact, no more than a criminal cartel itself. Nobody is doing the job that the public expects them to do, and, instead, they freeload at the public expense. Taking money under false pretenses is fraud. It is just as bad as fiddling expenses. The public does not have faith in the Home Office or the government, particularly in light of suspicious activity regarding the appointment of two biased public inquiry heads into institutionalized pedophilia and blackmail in Westminster, and the alleged use, by Miles 5, of video evidence filmed at child sexual exploitation parties being used to blackmail members of the British government. I have been advised that members of Parliament have no legal requirement to take on any constituency work. As a result, they are about as much use to their constituents as an ashtray on a motorbike. This is clearly wrong. People voted for these freeloaders so that they would be fairly represented and assisted should the need arise. People turn to them as a last resort, and are most often ignored by the majority of MPs or denied service in various ways. Sometimes the member takes some action to help the constituent and then suddenly drops the inquiry without explanation, which appears highly suspicious. There are, of course, exceptions and some excellent members of Parliament, but few speak out about the corruption they know to exist. About 6 members of the House of Commons come to mind out of 650. These good MPs are often abused by other members and the media. There are roadblocks to justice at every twist and turn. Most often, people are simply ignored in the hope that they will just go away. Indeed, many have mental breakdowns, commit suicide, or simply die trying to get justice from a brick wall. I have seen hundreds of appeals to officials and members of Parliament, committees, ministers, etc. which never receive replies. Many correspondence staff and ministers and members of Parliament are even in the habit of deleting emails without reading them, as if every member of the public is a fool not worth bothering with. This is acceptable to the British government, which buries its head in the sand, and seeks to maintain the status quo, pretending to know nothing of the rampant institutionalized corruption holding the country in its grip. The public has seen no action from the new anti-corruption champion, Matthew Hancock, MP, or his predecessor, Kenneth Clarke, MP, and has absolutely no faith in the system. There have never been any replies, to my knowledge, of correspondence sent to them about corruption and crime. What chance has anybody got for justice in the UK? Crime, especially organized white-collar crime, is completely out of control, as a direct result of all of the above, and more, not to mention official corruption and self-interest of many members of Parliament and ministers, and all the decoys that the Home Office sets up by pretending there are no laws to fit the crimes, when, in fact, there are many existing laws. They are just not being upheld by police, and the government does not care to ensure that police are doing their jobs. As Shadow Attorney Minister, Emily Thornberry has so rightly pointed out. Email me when Emily Thornberry speaks. View voting record. Most recent appearances. Numerology. Full profile. Emily Thornberry, Shadow Attorney General, Islington South and Finsbury, Labour. I wish the Attorney General the best of luck in his new role, particularly in explaining to this legal illiterate government their obligations under international and national law, to uphold the rule of law. I also wish him the best of luck with Home Office empire building, and that is the purpose of this question. Will he confirm reports in the Times and the Financial Times that ministers are discussing the abolition of the Serious Fraud Office, and will he give this House a clear assurance that he will fight such attempts to dismember the SFO, so that we continue to have an independent combined investigator and prosecutor of serious economic fraud? Read in context. http://www.theyworkforyu.com Debates at 2014-10-14B155.3 and S Corruption G156.3. The British government is not only legal illiterate but also criminally negligent, as is the Prime Minister. There is much interest in the matter from officials abroad, as Britain is not living up to its obligations to uphold the rule of law, and is jeopardizing the national security of other nations. I look forward to your response, and do hope that you will find this information useful for completing your project expediently. More information can be supplied, together with people who will be willing to meet with you, to share documentation and testimonies in support of the above and below, should you need more clarification. Individuals have international duties which transcend the national obligations of obedience imposed by the individual state. Crimes against international law are committed by men, not by abstract entities. And only by punishing individuals who commit such crimes can the provisions of international law be enforced. Yours sincerely, Jean James.